Hello, and thank you for tuning into the basics of effective communication that everyone should know. My name is Antony Sammeroff. I'm a counsellor, a relationship coach, and a communication trainer. Considering how big a part of our lives communication is, it's really quite amazing how rarely we actually consider what communication is. Why do we even do it? And how can we do it more effectively? So with that in mind, I thought I'd make this video to put out some useful information to help us all get along a little bit better. In good form, we should probably start by defining some of our terms. What is effective communication as opposed to ineffective communication? What is communication? Well, for communication to happen, you have to have a sender and a receiver. And communication is any action that passes a message from a sender to a receiver through any medium. What mediums do we communicate by? Well, obviously we speak to each other, and now we can send Facebook messages or texts, and we also receive communications through the television or other media. But in person, only 7% of what we communicate is communicated by the medium of our words. 38% is through our tone of voice, and 55% is through our body language. Now that we've defined what communication is, as well as having a look at how we do it, we should probably ask why we communicate, because you can only judge the effectiveness of an action by how well it meets its own aims. Broadly speaking, there are 6 reasons why people communicate. The first is to give or get information. The second is to encourage action or change. The third is simply to vent emotionally. The fourth reason is to maintain a feeling of respect, whether that's self-respect or the respect of the people around us. The fifth is to avoid uncomfortable emotions or thoughts, and the sixth is to create excitement or end boredom, although some might define those last two as part and parcel of the same thing. If you want more information on the 6 reasons why people communicate, there is a video on this channel dealing with that in more detail. For the purposes of this video, I think it would be adequate to say that we communicate to help us meet our emotional and psychological needs. Now there's another word that might be needing defined, because the word need can be used in all sorts of different ways. When I say a need is a discomfort or unsatisfactoriness that seeks to be resolved by inner or outer work. The most basic needs are obviously physiological, the need for air, food, water, shelter, and then there are some emotional and psychological needs which we might not die without, but we certainly do need them to thrive. And those would be things like comfort, love, autonomy, connection, stimulation. We often confuse our needs with our strategies for trying to satisfy those needs. So for example, I might have a need for connection, and I could try and meet that by inviting a friend over or by going out to a bar, but there's no need for going out to a bar. I know it might seem that way sometimes, but trust me on this one, chances are the underlying need is for something more basic. The more we can see through our strategies and other people's strategies to the needs underlying them, the more choice we have in finding satisfactory ways to meet our needs. And it's just the same with communication. The more you can look at why you're trying to communicate and why the other person is trying to communicate, the more you can put your heads together and think outside of the box. Now that we know that communication is any message sent from a sender to a receiver through any medium, and why we communicate, which is to meet our psychological needs, as well as the difference between a need and a strategy for meeting our need, we're in a great position to define what effective communication is. If we wanted to get technical, we would define effective communication as any form of communication that results in most people involved using strategies that help everyone get most of their psychological and emotional needs met most of the time. Okay, that is a bit of a mouthful, so let's just say that effective communication is communication that helps people get their needs met. Now let's look at different styles of communication and how effective they are. If someone uses a communication style aimed at getting their own needs met without very much regard for the other people around them, we can term that an aggressive communication style. Examples of aggressive communication include shouting, calling people names, bullying, as well as other forms of manipulation. Sometimes people communicate in a style which seems to put the needs of everyone else before their own. People pleasers and people who find it really hard to stand up for themselves. We can call that a passive communication style. Assertive communication is a strategy that stands for the needs of the communicator, but also takes into account the needs of the listeners. And as you may have guessed, that's what this video aims to teach you. A fourth communication strategy, which we definitely mean to avoid, is a passive-aggressive communication strategy, which is when someone tries to get their needs met simply by eliciting unpleasant emotions in someone else, rather than making any stand for their needs or anyone else's needs. Now that we've looked at 4 communication strategies, let's get down to the basics of effective communication. First of all, take an assertive attitude as opposed to a passive attitude or an aggressive attitude. A passive attitude might get you what you want, but it won't win you any respect. Alternatively, an aggressive communication style might get people to comply with you, but they'll never do it willingly or with a smile on their face, and they'll always resent you for strong-arming them into doing something they didn't necessarily want to do. Equally, don't take a passive-aggressive attitude. That's probably the worst communication strategy. The thing is, with passive-aggressive communication, it doesn't give anyone any indication of what you actually want. I'd also remind you to check that you're looking confident. Remember what we said before about how 55% of what we communicate comes through in our body language. Now that you're in good posture, make sure you know why you're communicating. What outcome are you going for? Do you want someone to take some specific action on your behalf? Are you trying to get some information? Maybe you just want to get to know someone better. Or maybe if you're upset or frustrated, you just like to vent some emotion and get some understanding. Believe it or not, identifying your goal before opening your mouth will make you a much more effective communicator. You will also want to identify what you want to communicate. What do you want the other person to know? These first couple of tips might seem a bit obvious, but it's really quite astonishing how often we don't take into consideration why we're communicating and what we want to communicate before starting a conversation. When is an appropriate time to communicate what you're trying to communicate, and where is an appropriate place to communicate it? Not to sound like Captain Obvious here, but these 2 factors are really important. Choose an appropriate time. If someone's focused on something else, eating, or about to go to bed, that's probably an inappropriate time to approach them to talk about anything important. If you need to, ask for their attention or get them to agree to a time that's convenient. Whatever you do, do not utter that deadly phrase, "we need to talk." People find that really intimidating. It's better to say, "I could use your help with a couple of things," or "could I borrow you for a minute?" As for appropriate context, people might not want to talk about work on their lunch break. No matter how funny your joke is, it might fall pretty flat at a funeral, and then a story about a sad funeral might not be exactly appropriate on a fun night out when you don't want to bring anyone down. One of the best ways to be an effective communicator is not to do what ineffective communicators do. So next we're going to go over some of the most common blocks to effective communication. First of all, stick to the facts. Don't start catastrophizing or fortune telling or trying to read the other person's mind and telling them what their motives are. Stick to what you know, which are the facts, what you're feeling, and what you're needing. Probably the biggest block to effective communication is using a tone which doesn't convey respect for the other person. You don't have to love them, but if you want them to cooperate with you, you best take a cooperative attitude. If you're angry, you might want to take some time to cool off or ask for a timeout. Another aspect of a respectful tone is avoiding expressing our judgments of other people by using character remarks or adjectives. In fact, it's completely possible to communicate everything we need, feel, and want without ever using any adjectives to describe ourselves or another person. For one thing, nothing will provoke defensiveness as much as calling the other person selfish or inconsiderate or lazy. And what's more, you're likely to wind up discussing whether or not the adjective's true instead of focusing on meeting each of your needs. The other thing you want to avoid are kill words or danger phrases, things that the mere utterance of provokes unpleasant emotions in people and gets their back up. We already mentioned the danger phrase, "we need to talk." Well, here are some other popular kill words. The first is obliging terms like "you should" or "you have to." It's probably better to say something like "I think you would benefit from," because people hate being told what they should do. It's better to give a suggestion and let people learn from their own mistakes. Another one we've all heard a lot of is "you always" or "you never." It's a really bad idea to use generalizations like that because it will derail the conversation from what you're trying to talk about to the other person citing an example of when they didn't always or didn't ever do what you told them that they always or never do. Also, avoid using discrediting terms like "you're wrong" or "you're being unreasonable." Even if you know for a fact that someone's wrong, telling them so in those words is not going to win you any favours. Ask them where they got their information or tell them you see it differently. We could probably go on kill words, but that'll have to wait for another video. Let's go on to what I consider the 3 keys of communicating effectively, which is to be precise, concise, and say what you want rather than what you don't want. Assertion is not playing cards or flirting. You don't have to keep a little bit back for yourself. And there's a big difference between telling someone, "I want you to spend less time at work," and telling them directly, "I'd like you to spend more time at home with me and the kids." Saying what you want rather than what you don't want makes it as easy as possible for people to help you meet your needs or renegotiate. And making an effort to be precise and concise will hold you back from lecturing at people, which, let's face it, none of us enjoy being on the receiving end of. Now, it's been widely noted that it really helps if you assert yourself using what's known as a simple I message, such as "I want to be listened to," rather than "you're not listening," or "I feel really frustrated when the living room's untidy when I come home from work," rather than "why didn't you clean up?" Using a simple I message, which is precise and concise, avoids character remarks, and says what you do want rather than what you don't want, focuses you and the listener on your needs and feelings rather than the perceived wrongs of the other person, which might provoke defensiveness, which is a block to moving towards working together to solve any problems. Finally, anticipate resistance. This is a critical point that's often left out of information concerning assertiveness. People do get defensive, so be prepared to deal with defensiveness when it arises after you assert yourself using your precise and concise I message that says what you do want rather than what you don't want. You can deal with defensiveness by listening to what the other person has to say and checking with them to make sure you understood them correctly. You can do that by paraphrasing, summarizing, or asking the simple question, "Let me make sure I got you right." Be prepared to go round in a circle. Assert, listen, check you got the other person right, then assert again. This might take a little patience, but in the long run, it's likely to save you time on fruitless conflicts. Once each person feels like their needs are adequately understood, you're going to want to put your heads together and start problem solving, because solutions that are unilaterally imposed are less likely to stick in the long term than ones that are reached by consensus. Like all the topics we've covered, going into more detail on problem solving will have to wait for future videos. The purpose of this was just to cover the basics in short in as practical a way as possible in 15 minutes. I would add that it takes 6 repetitions of material to retain 62%, so I strongly recommend that you listen to this free presentation once a week for 2 to 3 months. If you think you benefit from becoming a much more confident communicator, email me at enrichyourlife@outlook.com so we can arrange a free consultation to explore what your needs are and discover how I might be able to help you with them. If you thought this video was useful, please don't keep it to yourself. Or to put it in an I message, which is precise and concise, avoids character remarks, and says what I do want rather than what I don't want, I would really appreciate it if you shared this video.